Mascots in video games are always based on something. They're never totally pulled out of thin air. Some are quite obvious. I mean, look at all the video game characters that are based on Hulk Hogan or Bruce Lee. Some are quite surprising, such as Croc coming from a rejected pitch to Nintendo for a Yoshi game. And some, well, the less said, the better. But every now and then, the influence behind a character is so shocking, so downright bizarre, you'd be amazed how it even got off the ground. So, this episode, we take a look at these interesting idols, these creative concepts, and these software sirens, as I say. But, hello you! I'm Guru Larry, and I welcome you to Fact Hunt. 5 totally messed up inspirations for video game mascots. Lara Croft, one of the most well-known female protagonists in video games, and a 90s cultural phenomenon. When she wasn't chugging down Lucasade or being in U2 music videos, she was being pushed as a positive role model for girls. As what young lady doesn't aspire to be a multi-millionaire who steals from the dead and casually shoots endangered animals? Oh, this is the original Lara Croft I'm talking about here, by the way. The new Lara Croft's persona is just to have the shit beaten out of her by trees every 5 nanoseconds and constantly being stuck on an island populated by males who haven't seen a woman in decades, yet strangely all they want to do to her is stop her desecrating ancient temples. Anyhow, aside from her name being changed from Laura Croft to Lara Croft, as I just thought Americans couldn't pronounce Laura. Seriously, that's not a joke. The most infamous Tomb Raider fact is that she was based on creator and professional pub lookalike Toby Gard's rock-climbing sister, Frances. However, during an interview with the BBC in 2016, Toby concluded, nope, everyone was wrong. He actually based Lara on Jamie Hewlett's comic book character Tank Girl and Swedish musician Nana Cherry. Despite the fact he whined about Eidos prostituting his sister 12 years before to The Independent. So why after 2 decades of running around with this falsehood did Mr. Guard finally turn around and correct this infamous piece of trivia? Methinks Toby had a bit of a reality check, as saying you were influenced by the bloke who created Gorillaz and an 80s singer sounds far less creepy than admitting you just spent the last 20 years of your life sexualising your own sister. Totally not freaky at all, Toby. Now. Fat people in video games have always been stereotyped as ender-level bosses or fist sponges that can't be thrown. Very rarely are they ever an actual protagonist. Enter Chubby Gristle, Tech Software's 1988 Jet Set Willy knockoff, starring a rather perturbed obese car park attendant of the same name, and released on pretty much every single British home computer at the time. While it wasn't totally uncommon for a game to star mascots with rather mundane jobs in the 1980s, Tech's inspiration for Chubby Gristle was completely out of spite. You see, the whole development team were at odds with a real-life overweight car park attendant, whose rather cantankerous persona made their lives a misery, constantly hurling abuse at them to move their vehicles if he didn't particularly like how they parked their car that day. So, inspired by the suffering this rotund gentleman gave them on a daily basis, they spun the concept of a platform game starring a parodied, food-obsessed version of him, who must gobble his way through several consumable-related establishments, from a cafe to an entire supermarket, before going home to his wife for a steak and kidney pie and some spotted dick. Even his catchphrases like, "You can't park here," and "Have a word with the administrator" were digitised and made it into the game. Sadly, we may never know the name of the man that inspired Chubby Gristle, but I'm sure that Tech Software's employees can rejoice in the fact they got revenge on him by making massive profits mocking his weight and not giving him a single penny in royalties for simply trying to do his own job. Before Sega struck gold creating Sonic the Hedgehog, they desperately tried throwing the proverbial shit against the wall to find a mascot from all manner of licensed properties to see what would stick. They attempted everything you could possibly imagine, from Disney characters such as Mickey Mouse, real-life celebrities like Michael Jackson, to sports stars including James "I'm crap at boxing" Douglas. But out of all of these acquisitions, the most obtruse by far was Greendog, the surfer dude. Wait, what? Greendog's a license? I hear you ask? Why, indeed he is. He may resemble a Cenobite on vacation with his gangly frame and freakish lack of face. But Greendog is surprisingly based on the obscure 80s board game Surf Trip, which in turn was based on the career of Californian surfer Rick Green. Now, before you start asking me who Rick Green is, I don't bloody know. There's virtually nothing about him on Google. But what I have managed to piece together from the few articles and interviews about him online, Rick was a rather popular surfer in the late 80s, who came up with the concept of a board game loosely based on his surfing career, starring his Mary Sue, Greendog, as every bloody nickname in the 80s had to have the word dog on the end. However, Mr. Olivehound was quite the entrepreneur, as rather than approach MB Games, or Parker Brothers,
It's the bloody Parker Brothers!
to publish it, he crowdfunded a game by asking surfwear companies for $100,000 each in return for their branding in the game, netting Rick $900,000. That's a staggering $1.8 million in today's money. This business acumen impressed the owners of the Californian Raisins, Applause Inc., so much they licensed the rights to Greendog off him and promised a line of toys, t-shirts, towels, a Nintendo game, an animated movie, and even an ABC sitcom written by his own wife. Seriously. But, as you can tell with almost 3 decades of hindsight, the only Greendog property to ever emerge from this deal was a video game. And also not by Nintendo, but Sega, who loved the concept so much they created a whole new backstory for Greendog and released the game for both the Genesis and the Game Gear. Even this deal seems to be entirely from Rick Green's legwork to secure it. Applause is essentially just complete and utter clown shoes around his magnum opus. So, while this originally was an interesting tale about a character no one realised was a licensed property, it surprisingly turned out into a story about a bloke no one's ever heard of who walked into Sega's US HQ and convinced them to make a game starring him. You may have fallen off the face of the planet in recent years, Rick, but you lived the dream of every 90s teenager. Totally radical, dude. They may be sadly all but forgotten today, thanks to Sony hoarding their IP like a gaming golem, but in the early 90s, DMA Design's Lemmings was a cultural phenomenon. Released on literally every single system available at the time, the addictive suicidal rodent-preventing puzzler was one of the first video games to reach the mass market outside of the usual gaming stereotype. Heck, Lemmings' music even made it into the pop charts. It wasn't a particularly good song, but the 90s had absolutely zero taste in music anyway, so no one ever noticed. Now, the game's influence itself comes from a combination of the Atari ST Lunarlander/Choplifter hybrid, OIDS, as well as DMA Design's previous release, Walker. But what about the inspiration of the Lemmings design itself? I mean, they sure don't look like actual lemmings. Real lemmings are small, gerbily, hamster-looking things. Definitely nothing like the green-haired bipedal creations the game portrays them as. So, where on earth did they come from? Well, I won't beat around the bush here. They're a complete and utter knockoff of wombles. Yup, any Brits out there are probably kicking themselves right about now, as it's so blatantly obvious. But for those of you unfamiliar with wombles, they themselves were a cultural phenomenon in the mid-70s, about a group of white-haired creatures that would clean up after messy humans on Wimbledon Common. But wombles were a massive hit with the kids, receiving books, toys, a stop-motion animated TV series, and even a live-action movie starring Bonnie Langford and the dad out of Mary Poppins. So, there you have it. For all the praise DMA Designs received for their originality with the game, with the character designs themselves, they just thought, to hell with copyright infringement, and did a Sonichu on wombles. If you thought Toby Gard's sexualising his own sister was creepy enough, how about your own daughter? As that's exactly what one of the heads at THQ thought would be a fantastic idea when they agreed to base the main female character of their largely forgotten PS1 fighting game Versus on their daughter Mia. Now, Versus itself has an interesting history. It was originally a port of the Taito arcade game Fighter's Impact that was Doki Doki panicked a bit in an attempt to create a fighting game to appeal to an American audience, with characters redesigned by Marvel Comics artist Curtis Fujita. Anyhow, there's an unwritten law that every fighting game needs an attractive female as their advertising figurehead. Street Fighter has Chun-Li and Cammy, Soul Calibur is Ivy, and Dead or Alive has Zack. So in a case of pure nepotism, guess who THQ chose? Oh yes. If it wasn't bad enough they had Mia parading around the game wearing kinky Catholic schoolgirl uniforms, they went ahead and promoted her in adverts with her knickers showing and her underboobs hanging out, posting it in every single video game magazine throughout the Western Hemisphere. I know THQ did some really bizarre stuff in the 90s, but whoring out the head's daughter to horny teenagers so they could practice doing Shoryukens on her with their own personal joysticks really takes the biscuit. Hello you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to be first to see future Fact Hunt episodes. Click on the bell if you already are to make sure you're notified, and be sure to check out my other episodes. And if you want to be super awesome, check out my Patreon. But thanks again for watching, and I'll be seeing you next time. Ta-ra for now.